very much. Well, I don't know how many of you came to see the first part, which I think I gave in April. And that took us from oil lamps up to gas lighting in homes. So today's part is really from the start of electricity up to the present day. I've had quite fun putting it together. I hope it covers some of your interests. It's sort of at the intersection of history, science and technology. So there should be something for everybody in here at some point. So before the arrival of electric lighting, every means of lighting our homes and workspaces involved combustion of a fuel at the point of delivery. Before the arrival of electric lighting, this meant that all the options for lighting our homes and streets were to varying degrees primitive, dangerous, inconvenient, smelly and expensive. But by the end of the sort of period heyday of gas lighting, it had become quite sophisticated. And this advert shows a girl operating a pneumatic gas switch. So you could actually, towards the end of gas, turn the lights on and off with a switch if you had one of the more sophisticated installations. Until the 1920s, it would have been unusual to live in a house lit exclusively by electricity. But it's really only with the arrival of mains electricity that it has become cheap, easy and safe to light our homes, streets, and to extend our days into the evenings outside of the summer season. The change from candles, oil lamps and gas lighting to low energy bulbs and flat screen TVs happened practically within a single lifetime, about 100 years. It's something that we take so much for granted now that after food and water, access to electricity for lighting and other comforts and conveniences is coming to be regarded as a human right. So this was the first home in the country to be lit by electric light, and this is Cragside in Northumberland, and it was the home of the first Lord Armstrong, who developed the estate and built the house. So he was a businessman and inventor, and the house is now owned by the National Trust, and it's a great visit if you're up in Northumberland. Here's the chap himself. He was sort of Elon Musk of his day. So this is the generator, or one of the generators that was installed on the estate. The first one used an Archimedes screw, but this is one of the later ones, a turbine generator. And the generators were used in conjunction with large lead acid batteries, which helped to deal with variations in demand and maintain a fairly consistent voltage. In 1848, a carbon arc lamp was developed by State and Petrie, and experimentally it was used to light the portico of the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square. Although commercially uneconomic for some time, the ultra-bright light it gave found use in lighthouses and in some other public spaces. By 1878, advances in the technology allowed it to be used to light streets in London and Paris. This was the first type of electric lamp to be fitted at Cragside in 1878, with just a single lamp in the art gallery. The great intensity of light from the carbon arc lamp, its tendency to flicker, and noise from the arc made it unsuited to lighting homes. Inventing a softer electric light suitable for homes was a challenge that many inventors were working on. Since 1838, experiments with carbon and platinum filaments had not resulted in a practical bulb because the filaments oxidized very quickly, even when encased in a glass envelope. So very soon after the carbon arc lamp at Cragside, they were replaced by filament lamps developed by Swan. Look at those now. The first to crack this problem was Joseph Swan. By using a vacuum pump to extract most of the air from the glass envelope, the carbon filament lasted much longer. By February 1879, Swan had reached the point where he could have patented his lamp, but he hesitated to do so. This was a most unfortunate business decision, as later the same year, Thomas Edison took out worldwide patents on his version of the filament lamp, ensuring that he was the man that would be remembered for inventing the incandescent lamp. So this shows some of the different forms of the incandescent lamp in the early days. And the one in the middle you can see, which is Edison's lamp, has got the screw fitting on the top, which is what we still use today. At the Paris International Electrical Exhibition of 1881 and the Crystal Palace Electrical Exhibition of 1882, Edison and Swan's lamps were shown alongside others made by I think it's Sergeant St. George Lane Fox and Hiram Maxim. The main differences were the designs of the filament. With minor modifications, that Edison lamp, you can still go and buy it in the shops today. And that's a Swan lamp holder. In 1880, the industrialist and inventor Sir William Armstrong asked Swan to install 45 incandescent lamps in his home at Cragside in Northumberland. And 2 years earlier, Cragside had become the first house in the world to be lit by hydroelectricity. So anyway, it was installed in a lot of parts of the house after that because it proved so successful. The first public electricity supply station was established in Godalming, Surrey in 1881, but it proved unprofitable. The following year, another was established in Brighton, which was very successful. This means that Brighton can lay claim to having the longest continuous public electricity supply in the world. Initially, only arc lighting was supplied between specified hours and at a cost of 12 shillings per lamp per week, but prices were soon reduced. The power was supplied through a bare 7-gauge overhead copper wire 15 miles long. The same year they passed the Electric Light Act, which was the first public measure dealing with electricity supply. A problem that took some time to overcome was how to cope with peaks and troughs in customer demand. The supply voltage would fluctuate wildly according to the level of demand, causing lamps to dim and flicker or otherwise burn very brightly and break the element. Often the supply would fail completely. When gas was first introduced, it had proved quite hard for some people to understand how air coming through pipes could provide light. Now they had to come to terms with something invisible and potentially lethal that could travel through wires and provide light without a flame. In comparison with the gas industry, the electric industry quickly set up training courses, but there was still a shortage of engineers and installers, and there was much work to do developing standardized and reliable components. For country estates, installing electricity presented similar problems to gas in that they were usually situated well away from a public utility supply. However, if a head of water was available on the estate, a fairly modest stream would do, and then a hydroelectric turbine generator could be installed. And this shows the accumulator shed at Baddesley Clinton in Warwickshire. So this helped to sort of smooth out the peaks and troughs in voltage, and it meant if you had to do any maintenance work on the generator, you could still have power. Where a supply of electricity was available, which it would have been in most towns, electricity gained in popularity over gas, so it was very expensive to start with. Now, this Edwardian interior is at Mr. Straw's house in Worksop, and that light fitting is an electrolier. So in gas days, they used to be called a gasolier. So this is the front room. Mr. Straw was a middle-class shopkeeper and owned this rather fine villa of a house in Worksop. Only the ground and the first floors had electricity, and though gas was supplied, it was used for cooking only. You'll see that there are only 2 bulbs in the electrolier light fitting. The story goes that when a lamp unceremoniously fell into William Straw's plate at dinner, he vowed never to replace it. The adoption of gas for lighting had become widespread in towns by late Victorian times. The mass transition to electric light became sort of prevalent at the start of the 20th century in towns with a generating supplier, and in the first instance in the homes of the fairly well-off. Houses built after World War I, though, usually installed electric lighting, though gas was often still used for cooking. Designs of many early electric light fittings were based on historical styles. Later on, there was many other designs, including this Art Deco 1920s style, which was very popular. So obviously electricity is useful for many things other than lighting, and this graphic shows all the things that you could do with a penny's worth of electricity. It's from a book from 1914. And there's a nice picture here, which it was supposed to be a massive boom for women because there were so many home conveniences that could be run from electricity. And of course, it was the start of the development of consumer electronics.
Direct current is the flow of electric charge in one direction, for example, in a circuit powered by a battery. Alternating current is where the flow of electric charge periodically changes direction. In the late 19th century, a battle raged over whether we should be using an alternating current, AC, or direct current, DC, distribution system. This has sometimes been called the Battle or War of the Currents. In the UK, Hopkinson and Sir William Thomson, and from 1892, Lord Kelvin, supported DC, and Sebastian Ziani de Ferranti and Professor Sylvanus Thompson supported AC. In the end, AC won out because of the ability to step up and step down the voltage using transformers, which allowed transmission over much greater distances. So what was the next development? In 1900, several Acts of Parliament were passed granting rights to power companies in perpetuity to supply electricity to authorized undertakings and for industrial and manufacturing purposes. This is how the industry started. A council would build a little power station. They would have coke coming in by train to feed the power station, and it might be generating and distributing at a particular voltage like 2200 V. These council power stations would interconnect each other, giving them great flexibility and security of supply. The technology to use higher voltages for this interconnection was improving. Voltages progressed from 6.6 kV to 11 kV to 22 kV to 33 kV to 66 kV and then by around the 1920s to 132 kV. This meant that the small council generators could be replaced by larger, regional generating stations. In the early days of the 20th century, there was no standardization of either the voltage, whether the power supplied was via AC or DC, or in the type of electrical fittings that would be used in houses. National coordination. In 1926, the Electricity Supply Act introduced the first effective national coordination. The Central Electricity Board was created to concentrate the generation of electricity in a limited number of power stations. These stations were to be interconnected by a national grid, which was largely completed by 1935. They connected up all of these larger, predominantly coal-fired power stations in the 1930s to the national grid, which was 132 kV. The locations were determined by accessibility of coal, meaning many of the power stations were located on the coalfields and/or on the banks of the Thames where coal could easily be brought in by barge, using the canal network. It was only with the building of the national grid during the 1930s that electricity came to rural areas, and supply current and voltage were standardized. Supergrid. By the 1960s, further advancements in technology meant that the achievable transmission voltages, up to 275 kV and then 400 kV, were such that the grid could now be overlaid by a supergrid. This interconnected huge power stations, the like of which we see today. We started to see a mix in generation which impacted the location of the stations, for example nuclear, which needed to be by the sea for cooling water. Instead of transporting coal down to the south of the UK, the supergrid meant huge power stations could be built right on the coal fields and the electricity sent down by transmission wires. Nationalized industry. Central Electricity Generating Board, CEGB, owned all of the big generators of the national grid. They fed electricity to the 12 local electricity boards, like the London Electricity Board or the Yorkshire Electricity Board, who took it at 132 kV and sold it on to the consumers within their catchment area. At this point, the 132 kV network was no longer the country's backbone. The power stations that it once connected were probably now just switching points, with the generating equipment removed. So while technically the lines looked like transmission, their role was much less to do with power station interconnection, and so, around 1970, they were transferred from the CEGB, formed in 1957, to the distribution companies.
This is a pylon going up in the 1920s, so it's only a very little one. And here's one of the most well-known of the power stations. So I've got another short video here that deals with the national grid. We've got two different takes. one's good. This is quite good.
Here below London, 32 kilometres of new tunnels are nearly finished, but these aren't for people, they're for power. Cables carrying 400,000 volts will run through here, supporting the city as it keeps growing and keeps demanding more and more electricity. This project cost £1 billion, all to keep the lights on. So how did we get to this? Well, back in the 1920s, electricity was generated by hundreds of small companies in towns and cities across the country. They were all different and mostly incompatible. London alone had 24 voltages and 10 frequencies. So if you moved to the next street over, you might have had to replace all your light bulbs. If you had any light bulbs, that is, the cost of electricity was out of reach of nearly everyone. Now, the answer might have been to do what other countries in Europe were doing: set up and enforce standards, regulate prices, maybe even nationalise the power companies, and bring the price down for everyone, people and business. Good plan in theory, but the trouble is that the Prime Minister at the time was Stanley Baldwin, and he led the Conservative Party. Politically, he couldn't just assume control of private corporations. That was socialist. That was something that the other side did. So the solution was a very clever and very British compromise: the National Gridiron, later just National Grid. The Central Electricity Board, backed up by the government and run privately, would construct and own the central infrastructure. It would build a network of transmission lines sweeping across the country. The grid would reduce the risk for the private generating companies and let them reach a much, much larger market. If they wanted to connect, if they wanted to reach everyone, then they had to meet the grid standards for frequency, for voltage, and for reliability. The greatest story I found while I was researching this is that originally there were 6 separate grid areas spread all around the country, all run individually. It was judged too risky by their managers to actually connect them all into one national grid. But it was, theoretically, possible. Sometimes 2 or maybe even 3 of those grid areas were connected to help out if one power station somewhere went down. So, on the night of 29th of October 1937, without any permission, the engineers in the control rooms quietly decided to connect the whole country together for an hour or 2 and see what would happen. And it worked! And a year later, even their managers agreed that it was the only way to make sure the lights stayed on everywhere. And so while the level of regulation and the level of privatisation has changed over the years, as it has in pretty much every country in the world, and while the technology has developed to the point that instead of laying transmission lines, we are now in billion-pound tunnelling projects 60 metres under London, that mostly private grid is what we still have today. It's listed on the London Stock Exchange. If history had turned out differently, perhaps this tunnel would have been a government operation, but even if it was, we'd have still needed this to keep the lights on. These tunnels themselves and all the infrastructure around me, go check.
So before World War I, electricity was mostly to be found in middle and upper class homes in towns and cities. So it was more expensive than gas until the national grid rolled out. Lower class households would have started with a couple of sockets and lights downstairs and a light on the landing. And you would probably still be taking a candle to bed until after World War II. Adapting light sockets to run appliances was a common but rather dangerous practice. Electricity, as was mentioned earlier, only started to become available in rural areas after the national grid was set up. Now this is the big daddies of the national grid. This is the 400 kilovolt network, and this is at Shotting. So it's very impressive to stand next to this. You can see this from the footpath that goes through Shotting. I think there's still around about 22,000 pylons. So coal and gas-fired power stations were the mainstay of the generating grid for over 100 years. With renewables in the form of wind, solar and biofuels starting to make a contribution from the 1990s, hydroelectricity makes up just 2.2%. Now this is Cotton Power Station, which is one we could see from where we lived in Derbyshire in the village of Whitwell. So this was when it was running in 2013. And that's the control room for the power station. So quite a sophisticated operation. It ran from 1968 to 2019, and during its operating time, it generated nearly 500 terawatt hours, which was enough to power the UK for about 18 months. Its peak output represented enough energy to run 3.7 million households. There are now new renewable projects planned for the site, such as the Cottam Solar Project, but these are expected to serve a much smaller number of homes, about 180,000, to about 30% of its former capacity. So we're now going to look at some of the lighting technologies that have changed over that period. So this is the development of the efficiency of lighting from, it takes us up to, I don't know, just about the 1950s. So you're getting more lumens per watt as time goes on, but there are lots of different technologies, but we are going to look at two of them. So I can get this video start. So fluorescent lighting to start with.
When we think of fluorescent lighting today, we often imagine the sterile glow of office buildings, classrooms, or big box stores. But behind that familiar hum and white light lies a fascinating story of scientific discovery, technological innovation, and global transformation. The history of fluorescent lighting stretches back to the 19th century, through the pioneering work of physicists and inventors who were captivated by the mysterious behaviors of gases and electricity. What began as a curious scientific phenomenon evolved into a revolutionary lighting technology that reshaped the way the world works, learns, and lives. Let's explore right here on History of Simple Things. The origins of fluorescent lighting can be traced back to the discovery of cathode rays in the 1850s. Scientists like Heinrich Geissler and Julius Plucker began experimenting with gas discharge tubes, which would emit light when an electric current passed through them. These early glass tubes, evacuated of air and filled with gases such as neon or mercury vapor, were the ancestors of both neon and fluorescent lights. Geissler created the first Geissler tube in the 1850s, which became a popular novelty item and a scientific curiosity. They didn't provide much illumination, but they demonstrated that electricity and gas could be used to produce light, an idea that would grow into something much larger. These tubes laid the groundwork for later discoveries in the field of electroluminescence and gas discharge, which are essential principles behind fluorescent lighting. The next major breakthrough came with the discovery of ultraviolet light and its ability to stimulate fluorescence. In 1896, German physicist Friedrich Reinitzer and British physicist Sir William Crookes observed that certain materials emitted visible light when exposed to invisible ultraviolet rays. This led to a growing interest in materials that fluoresced, meaning they absorbed invisible radiation and re-emitted it as visible light. Around the same time, Wilhelm Röntgen's discovery of X-rays further pushed the scientific community to investigate electromagnetic radiation in all its forms. These breakthroughs deepened our understanding of light, radiation, and the potential to harness these phenomena for practical uses. In the early 20th century, inventors began to envision practical lighting devices based on these discoveries. The key to creating fluorescent lighting was figuring out how to coat the inside of a glass tube with phosphor materials that would glow when struck by ultraviolet light, which was generated by an electric arc passing through mercury vapor. This concept became viable through the efforts of several inventors, including American engineer Peter Cooper Hewitt. In 1901, Hewitt developed one of the first mercury vapor lamps. These lamps emitted a bluish-green light that was far from ideal for general use, but they were efficient and lasted longer than incandescent bulbs. Although not quite fluorescent, Hewitt's lamps represented a crucial step in the evolution of gas discharge lighting. It wasn't until the 1930s that true fluorescent lighting became a commercial reality. A major turning point came with the work of American inventors and scientists at General Electric GE, particularly George Inman and Richard Thayer. Inman and his team successfully developed a practical fluorescent lamp by combining a mercury vapor discharge with a phosphor coating on the inside of the glass tube. When the ultraviolet light generated by the discharge hit the phosphor, it would glow brightly in the visible spectrum. These lamps were more energy efficient and lasted longer than incandescent bulbs, making them an attractive option for large-scale lighting applications. General Electric introduced the first commercially viable fluorescent lamps at the 1939 New York World's Fair, where they captured the public's imagination and marked the beginning of a new era in lighting. During World War II, fluorescent lighting gained momentum as factories and military facilities sought efficient, long-lasting lighting solutions. The wartime boom in industrial production meant that the
Sorry, I'm not sure what's happened there. I think we've got a technical glitch. The lamp gone. Yeah, let's try. Yeah, I think the bulb's gone. We might have to have a part 3. Right.
I just overheated.
Possibly.
Once it will start again when it cools down.
I'm powering it down and powering it back on again.
Yeah, well, that might help.
No, it doesn't.
On now.
We've not had this problem before with the projector, have we?
No. Which is very cool.
Yeah.
Is it back on?
I think it's just overheated, isn't it?
But it's not very bright.
No, it'll brighten up. It comes on at a low level when it first comes on.
All right.
Give it a couple of minutes. Sorry about that, folks. If we get anywhere now. I think we'll move on to the next slide and see if we get anywhere with that. Right, so this shows you a kitchen with a fluorescent light fitting, and this is really where fluorescent lights were mostly used in homes. So, or garages, but mostly they were used in commercial settings. And one of the first types of compact fluorescent tubes in the UK was launched in Europe in 1983, developed by Philips. And this lamp marked a significant innovation by integrating the ballast and the starter into a single unit that could directly replace incandescent bulbs in standard fixtures. Now recall this cost over £10 when it first came out, a lot of money at the time, equivalent to about £40 today. Its 900 lumen output was comparable to a 60-watt tungsten bulb. The next development was this helical tube, which allowed the compact fluorescents to be smaller, and they also warmed up quicker. It's one of the big complaints with these types of bulbs was that when you first turned them on, they only gave about half their eventual light output, so they had a reputation for being rather dingy sometimes. And this shows the electronics sort of miniaturized to go in the base of the bulb. And this is a modern LED with a similar arrangement with the electronics condensed into the base of the bulb. And you can see those are the LEDs mounted on this plate. Right, let's have another go at the video, see if we're going to get any sound out of this.
Welcome to the History of Simple Things, where we delve into the fascinating history behind the little things that shape our world.
Just looking at LEDs.
In the grand tapestry of human innovation, few inventions have revolutionized our daily lives as profoundly as the LED, light-emitting diode. These tiny but mighty sources of light have permeated virtually every aspect of modern existence, from the screens of our smartphones to the streetlights that guide our nocturnal wanderings. However, the journey of the LED from laboratory curiosity to ubiquitous illumination is a saga rich with scientific breakthroughs, technological leaps, and relentless human ingenuity. Our story begins in the early 20th century, amidst the burgeoning field of semiconductor physics. Scientists were beginning to explore the properties of materials like silicon and germanium, laying the groundwork for the digital age that would follow. It was in this fertile intellectual landscape that the concept of the diode first emerged, a device capable of allowing electric current to flow in only one direction. This fundamental principle would serve as the cornerstone for the development of the LED. The true genesis of the LED, however, can be traced back to the pioneering work of Russian scientist Oleg Losev in the 1920s. Despite working in relative obscurity, Losev conducted experiments with various semiconductor materials, observing that certain crystals emitted light when an electric current passed through them. He dubbed this phenomenon electroluminescence, laying the foundation for what would become one of the most significant innovations of the modern era. To understand electroluminescence, it occurs when an electric current passes through certain materials, energizing electrons and creating regions where electrons are in higher energy states. When these energized electrons encounter holes in the material's atomic structure, they release energy as light photons while returning to lower energy states. This direct conversion of electrical energy into light within the material makes electroluminescence highly efficient, requiring no heating of filaments like incandescent bulbs do. Losev's discoveries languished in relative obscurity for decades, overshadowed by the rapid pace of technological advancement during the mid-20th century. It wasn't until the 1960s that practical applications for electroluminescence began to emerge, thanks in large part to the efforts of two scientists working independently on opposite sides of the Atlantic, Nick Holonyak Jr. in the United States and H.J. Round in England. In 1962, Holonyak, then a researcher at General Electric, made a breakthrough that would change the course of lighting technology forever. Using gallium arsenide phosphide as a semiconductor material, he developed the first practical visible spectrum LED, emitting a red light. This monumental achievement earned him the moniker the father of the LED and laid the groundwork for the myriad applications that would follow. Building upon Holonyak's pioneering work, researchers around the world began to explore ways to expand the color range and efficiency of LEDs. One significant breakthrough came in the 1970s with the development of the blue LED by Shuji Nakamura, working at Nikkei Corporation in Japan. By combining indium gallium nitride with other semiconductor materials, Nakamura succeeded in producing blue light, completing the RGB, red, green, blue trifecta necessary for full color displays and white light generation. The advent of the blue LED marked a watershed moment in the history of illumination, unlocking a host of new possibilities for energy-efficient lighting and display technologies. Suddenly, LEDs were no longer confined to the realm of indicator lights and electronic displays. They could illuminate entire rooms, adorn buildings with dazzling light shows, and even replace traditional incandescent and fluorescent bulbs in homes and businesses. The rapid advancement of LED technology in the late 20th and early 21st centuries has been nothing short of astonishing. As researchers continue to push the boundaries of efficiency, brightness, and color fidelity, LEDs have become the lighting technology of choice for a wide range of applications, from automotive headlights to stadium scoreboards to underwater exploration. Beyond their practical utility, LEDs have also become symbols of sustainability and environmental stewardship. Compared to traditional lighting technologies, LEDs consume significantly less energy, last far longer, and contain no hazardous materials like mercury. As concerns about climate change and energy conservation continue to grow, LEDs have emerged as a critical tool in the fight against environmental degradation. Looking to the future, the potential of LEDs seems virtually limitless. Researchers are exploring ways to harness quantum dots, nanowires, and other exotic materials to further enhance the performance and versatility of LEDs. From ultra-efficient solid-state lighting to next-generation displays that rival the clarity and vibrancy of OLEDs, the evolution of LED technology promises to reshape the way we illuminate and interact with the world around us. Let's now put together what we learned and delve deeper into the intricate process of how LED lights actually works. LED lights work differently from traditional bulbs like incandescent ones. Instead of heating a filament to produce light, LEDs use a process called electroluminescence. This happens inside a tiny device called a diode made from special materials like gallium arsenide or indium gallium nitride. When electricity flows through these materials, it stimulates electrons, making them jump to higher energy levels. When these stimulated electrons return to their lower energy states, they release energy as light photons. This process creates the light we see from LEDs. LEDs are super efficient because they directly convert electricity into light without wasting much energy as heat. Plus, scientists can control the color and brightness of LED light by choosing different materials and structures. Another cool thing about LEDs is they last a long time, much longer than traditional bulbs. That's because they're made from sturdy materials and don't have delicate parts like filaments. This makes LED lights not only energy efficient, but also durable and sustainable. As we wrap up our exploration of the evolution of LED lights, we've uncovered a narrative rich with scientific discovery, technological innovation, and human creativity. From the early experiments of Oleg Losev to the groundbreaking work of Nick Holonyak Jr., Shuji Nakamura, and countless others, the story of LEDs is a testament to the power of human ingenuity to transform the world around us. As we reflect on the impact of LED technology, it's clear that its influence extends far beyond mere illumination. LEDs have become symbols of sustainability, efficiency, and progress in an increasingly interconnected world. From reducing energy consumption and carbon emissions to enabling new forms of expression through dynamic lighting displays, LEDs have fundamentally changed the way we interact with our environment. Looking ahead, the future of LED technology holds even greater promise. Researchers are exploring new materials, manufacturing techniques, and applications that promise to push the boundaries of efficiency, performance, and versatility. From flexible displays and wearable technology to smart lighting systems that adapt to our needs in real time, the possibilities are truly endless. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history and
So there's one downside with both LEDs and fluorescents, and that is that the spectrum of colour that they emit is not continuous. So the graph on the left shows you the output from an incandescent bulb, and it's completely continuous, and you get a large output at the red end of the spectrum. The one on the right shows the output from a fluorescent light, and that has spikes in the output in the ultraviolet and in the green part of the spectrum, which is good for efficiency because our eyes are most sensitive to green light. But it also means that the colour quality, particularly for sort of interiors, is not as good as incandescent lamps. Although those problems are being addressed, and the very best LEDs are now pretty good, but most of the ones that you'll buy, the basic ones, aren't really brilliant yet. And they also with both LEDs and fluorescents, there can be a problem with flicker, depending on how the electronics are set up. Again, that's getting better, but it can still be a problem, and some people are particularly sensitive to it. Now this shows that you notice it particularly when you try and take photographs with rooms lit with LED or fluorescent. You can end up with a green colour cast, which you might not notice to the naked eye, but when you take the camera sensor doesn't forgive at all, and you can end up with this green or purple colour cast on in some situations. So now the other thing is the banning of inefficient light bulbs, the tungsten lamps. Now this clip is from 2009. This is a news clip from Sky News.
Demand for 100-watt bulbs has been so great at Roger King's hardware store in Hampton Hill that he's almost sold out. Customers, he says, have been stockpiling them in 10s and 20s while they still have the chance. Soon the only ones available will be the pricier low-energy variety.
They don't like being told what to do for a start. Many of them don't feel that it's actually going to help the situation of energy conservation. Many of them are concerned that they're not going to be able to see properly with the new type of light because it rapidly diminishes in effectiveness.
But from Tuesday, it'll be illegal to import most traditional style light bulbs. And once wholesalers' current stocks are gone, that's that.
There's no time limit on when people have to replace their bulbs, but the question would be, why wouldn't you? They save you money, they save energy, could save 1 million tonnes of CO2, which is the equivalent of taking 70,000 cars off the road. There's no reason not to.
Lighting makes up around 1/5 of the cost of our electricity bills, but low-energy bulbs use up to 80% less electricity than standard bulbs. They're said to last around 10 times longer and save as much as £40 each before they need replacing. B&Q has seen a significant increase in sales since the beginning of the year. It's about to double the range it sells. The ban means it won't be long before all frosted and pearl light bulbs like this disappear from shop shelves altogether. It's also your last chance to buy 100-watt clear light bulbs. Lower wattage versions will be around for a while, but they're being phased out by 2012. But despite evidence that the new bulbs are safe, as bright as conventional bulbs, and worth the price, not everyone is convinced.
A big brother attitude. They're trying to tell each other what we should and shouldn't be doing. And the message isn't really good out there, really, to be honest.
There are a lot of people that are very selfish and just think about their lifetime, but we've got to think about our children and their children's children.
The bulbs seem to be very long and stuck up above my lampshade and looked a bit peculiar. And I bought some once that had a very cold light, and I didn't like that. But if those problems are sorted out, I'm happy with it.
The range is larger these days, and while some bulbs are a strange shape, many look more conventional. But there's no denying they're expensive. Sceptical shoppers will just have to swallow the cost and accept that maybe it's a price worth paying to save the planet. Emma Birchley, Sky News, Surrey.
So we're now into the era of smart light bulbs, which I can't honestly get very excited about these, but yeah, I know they are very popular with a lot of people. And you can control, if you sort of connect them up to your smart speaker, you can turn your lights on and off and up and down in brightness through your smart speaker by just a verbal command. And then I do find these useful. So switching automation for rooms that you don't go in very often. So either on the left you've got the passive infrared detector type, and then the ones on the right, which are the latest type, which use a microwave sensor to detect when you enter a room. And I do find those really good. And they do save even more electricity because the lamps just come on and off as you go in and out of the room. So I find that really useful. So I'm going to talk a bit now about the transition to renewables. Go back to Cotton Power Station. In 2024, 58% of the UK's electricity was produced by renewables. Drax Power Station was adapted to burn compressed pellets in 2013. And there are now no coal-fired power stations left in the UK because the country's last one, Radcliffe-on-Soar, was closed down on the 30th of September 2024. That ended 140 years of coal-fired generation, making the UK the first major economy in the G7 to phase out coal power. So the familiar cooling towers of coal-fired power are disappearing from the landscape. So this was a gratuitous opportunity to put this in. So that was in the last month that was demolished. And that's it. The end of my talk.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that. Probably absolutely stunned by the amount of information you've got before us. But have you got any questions for Rob?
Stunned silence.
It's not a question, but a comment. And let's say if we go back to Sandy Johnson's talk, where he showed the modified new periodic table, you can understand why Trump is going into Ukraine and Greenland and wherever to get these rare earth metals that are obviously needed for these sorts of applications.
I mean, the more I went into this, the more I realised I was just skimming the surface. It's such a deep subject, but it's one that sort of doesn't get much of an airing. So, I've always been interested in lighting because I sort of grew up during the coal miners' strike with the sort of power cuts that came in sort of 3 or 4 times a week, and I used to rig up my own battery-powered lights to get us through the blackouts. So I was sort of interested in it from that point on.
Just find it confusing. You go into B&Q and you just want a light bulb. It's such an array. It's not going to help you on which one is best.
It's also interesting that a lot of the upland estates are moving back onto mini hydropower. So they're producing their own light, and solar panels on the roof. They've got little mini hydropower setups which run their estate and presumably sell excess to the grid.
I think the internet's very helpful in spreading this technology because it's much easier to find out what other people are doing and learn about how it's done.
People research on what it does to your
Yes. There's always a need for more research. Well, the more you hear about it, the more you want to learn. And certainly I feel that way today. But I was intrigued because when I was a boy living in Newcastle on the Rhine, in 1950, we still had DC.
Gosh.
Yeah, it was one of the last to go for some reason. So it's intriguing. And I personally didn't know very much at all about the development of the industry and the developments of the national food society. I found the whole thing absolutely fascinating. And I'm extremely impressed by the amount of effort you've done.
Well, I must fess up that I first started putting this talk together about 20 years ago for my local history society, and I have adapted it since. So part of the work was already done. It's only the last half of the slides here that I've had to do for this talk, and I've cheated by pulling a few videos off YouTube.
Well, I think that was very impressive. Very helpful.
I couldn't do those graphics in a couple of slides.
Can I just make one point out of interest? You say we started at DC, then went to AC. They're very aware now we're going back to DC, ultra power converters. Because DC is far more efficient on long-term transmission.
That's
and
true.
To couple between countries, like the network between when we need to get power from France, say,
right.
It's not AC that does it. It's
really?
converted to DC. And then you've got two frequencies. You've got, say, France, well, it's better now. Say France is working at 60 hertz, we're working at 50 hertz. It doesn't matter with the DC range.
Right.
And it's a more efficient method of transmission. But you need these complex power inverters, which have now been developed to do the transformation where they didn't have them in the early days.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Right. I'm sorry about the projector halfway through. Yeah. Not sure what happened there. And the video went out of sync as well, didn't it?